Okay, we have looked at Tobago and the implications in the event of war with Venezuela, of a Venezuelan missile attack to take out the raiders in Tobago, and the possibility of the destruction of the Tobago airport, collapse of the Tobago economy, the political implications, the economic implications. What if Tobago is so vulnerable? Trinidad is far more vulnerable because the closest distance between between Venezuela and Trinidad is only 9 miles. Yeah. 9 miles, yes. So what will be the implications? I know this is going to be a difficult question. What will be the implications in Trinidad, political and economic, of a missile striking Trinidad?
Well, that's massive. I mean, the Venezuelans, they've said it quite openly, have reinforced their coastal defenses.
Okay.
And those coastal defenses are not just on the northern coast, which is the Caribbean coast of Venezuela, but on their eastern coast. And their eastern coast, part of it is Gulf of Paria, right, which, as you say, is and then, of course, going further south of Trinidad, that's their eastern coast. And they've strengthened their coastal defenses all around. It therefore means that they would have military capability to attack Trinidad. And there have been threats. I mean, the Minister of Justice made some statements, and sometimes I would say those statements ought not to be made, but I'm not him, and I'm not in Venezuela. That's their determination. But the Minister of Justice, Diosdado Cabello, is actually a very powerful individual in Venezuela. He's one of the deputy leaders of the ruling party, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. When President Chavez was ill, he had a choice to make as to who he would recommend to the party to succeed him. Yeah. The two persons, one was Nicolas Maduro, and the other was Diosdado Cabello.
Okay.
Some in Venezuela, and I just get this from talking to friends and so on, some people thought that it would have been Cabello, but it wasn't. It was Maduro that was chosen by Chavez. He had his reasons. Not judging. But in other words, Diosdado Cabello has been for a long time a very powerful political figure in Venezuela. So when he speaks, his words are not to be taken lightly. He's not just another minister, all right? He has a lot of weight in Venezuela. And he said recently that, you know, Venezuela doesn't want to hurt the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But he said, Madam, meaning the Prime Minister, if Venezuela is attacked and Trinidad and Tobago is part of that, there are implications for Trinidad and Tobago. Already, even without a missile strike, the government of Venezuela has canceled all of the energy agreements that had been previously signed. So not only is the famous or infamous Dragon gas deal now no longer possible once the government of Venezuela remains the same, and that is the easiest gas for Trinidad and Tobago to get because it's very close to the north coast of Trinidad. And once that gas comes out, well, Venezuela's gas. So we need Venezuela's permission to produce the gas. It just means running a pipeline from the Dragon field to an existing platform, which is a shell platform off the north coast. And then that shell platform already has pipelines that take the gas down to Point Lisas and to Point Fortin. So that was an easy project. That is now not going to happen once the status quo remains. The second, there are two other gas fields, which are cross-border fields, the Lorraine Manatee and the Coquina Manikin fields. Now, those cross-border fields straddle the maritime border between Trinidad and Venezuela, which means that the gas, of course, under the sea doesn't know where the maritime boundary is. But Venezuela agreed to allow Trinidad and Tobago to produce the gas on our side of the border. So they quantified it. So let us say there are 10 trillion cubic feet of gas in these gas fields, and 6 trillion is estimated to be on the Venezuelan side and 4 trillion on our side. Venezuela said, okay, you could produce up to 4 trillion cubic feet of gas, after which you can't produce because now you're now producing Venezuelan gas. Now, if Venezuela has now said they're canceling all the agreements, it could mean that they don't want us to produce any gas even though it's on our side of the border, because you have to have their agreement, because if you produce, you could be producing their gas too, yes? So all of that is up in the air, which has an impact on our economy. The government has said quite wrongly, oh, we don't need Venezuelan gas. Well, the reality is that we're not producing enough gas in Trinidad and Tobago right now, and our plants are shutting down. 1 out of the 4 LNG plants is down. Nutrien, a major producer of ammonia, has shut down completely. Some of the other major methanol plants have shut down and so on. So we are in difficulty. And to get new gas takes years. There are some projects that BP and other companies have that are coming on stream, but that will just kind of increase gas production a little bit, but not significantly enough to enable all of our petrochemical plants to operate at 100% capacity. So the reality is that our economy is already being affected. Maybe the Prime Minister believes that the Americans will get rid of Maduro, and the woman who obscenely got the Nobel Peace Prize the other day, Maria Machado, will become president of Venezuela. She has already said to a U.S. investment forum that the trillions of dollars of oil and gold and everything else is available to you to exploit, right? So maybe that is what Mrs. Prasad Bisesa is hoping for, and then that Machado, being president, will then say, okay, Trinidad and Tobago, you could get dragon gas, and Rubio will give us a OFAC license to produce it and everything. That may be her gamble, but it's a gamble, because if there's a missile strike by Venezuela and it hits a gas processing facility in Trinidad or a pipeline, it could be in Point Lucius, or it could be Guayagüari, where the gas comes ashore. It could be anywhere.
Okay.
It could just be one of the major pipelines running, so anything like that, it doesn't even have to hit Maulana. It could just fly over Trinidad.
Yeah.
And that would create a huge crisis for us. That could create a huge crisis for us. So Mrs. Prasad Bisesa has said the Americans will defend us. The radar is there to defend us. But the issue, she's putting the horse before the cart, the cart before the horse, because we would not be in danger of an attack from Venezuela if we had not taken this position to be complicit and totally united with Washington's colonial and imperial agenda. That is what put us in danger. And that is why she now hopes the Americans will defend us, because we're in danger. But how did we get into a position of danger? We got into a position of danger because of the positions the government took.
The purpose of this discussion is to inform the public of implications of what is now about to take place. Tell me, in the event that the United States attacks Venezuela, and then Venezuela responds with a missile attack anywhere in Trinidad, what would be the implications, number one, politically in the country, this island, number two, for the economy, and number three, for the Trinidad and Tobago dollar?
Yes, they're all interlinked. I mean, if the missile actually was fired at Trinidad and Tobago, or Trinidad, even if it did not hit anything, but it whistled overhead and so on, of course, psychologically, there'll be fear and panic. You weren't here, but a couple of months ago, about a month and a half ago, on a Friday afternoon, there was a report coming out of the United States. I got it on my phone, so it was not a wild social media rant. It came from the New York Times, Washington Post, saying that their information was that Trump was about to announce an imminent attack on Venezuela. Now, it didn't happen, but that was the report. When that happened, at the same time, the Trinidad Tobago Defense Force hierarchy summoned all the members of the Defense Force back to base. And the Trinidad Tobago Police Service called all the police officers to cancel their leave. All of this happened within like an hour and a half. And everybody was aware in Trinidad Tobago what was happening. And there was panic in town, traffic jam, people trying to get out of town. A number of government offices and institutions closed early and so on. And so there was a lot of fear. People went to the supermarket to buy. Some people went by the gas stations to stock up and fill their tanks and so on. So and that was just, you know, reports of something taking place. That not actually shots fired, but that something may have happened. In the event that something does happen, as a country, as a people, we are totally unprepared for that. Totally unprepared. So there'll be a lot of psychological impacts, fear, trauma, anxiety. Do people send their children to school? Do you not send your children to school? Those basic day-to-day things. Do I go to work? Do I not go to work? And so on. So at the level of people's human existence, that gets impacted. Secondly, in terms of the economy, well, businesses will be closed. Any possibility of new investment coming in will be on hold because no investor is going to put in money in a situation where a country has instability. And people, those who have US dollars, or capital flight will be exacerbated. There's already capital flight. So more capital flight will take place, which means US dollars will flow out of Trinidad and Tobago, which worsens our foreign exchange problem. And that then has implications for the value of the Trinidad and Tobago dollar, and so on. So all of these things are implications.
What will be the implications for the Trinidad and Tobago dollar?
Ultimately, there would be a devaluation.
There will be a devaluation.
Ultimately, yes. If there's capital flight and our foreign exchange reserves drop precipitously, then the government may have no other choice but to go to the IMF, and the IMF would then say you have to devalue your dollar. That is how, because the IMF has wanted us to devalue for many years.
There is the official market and there is the black market.
The black market rate, of course, as we all know, is much higher than the official rate.
What were the implications in the unofficial market?
Oh, that tends to escalate. Well, because the official rate, they could try to hold it for a while, ultimately can't hold. But the black market rate will simply
skyrocket.
Oh yes, that is what happens. Because
in 1970, there was looting.
1990.
1990, there was looting all over Port of Spain when there was the attempt to overthrow the government. Was there any looting in 70 in the Black Power?
I think one or two shop windows were broken in one or two places, but nothing of significance, no.
Is there the possibility of a missile strike on Trinidad provoking looting?
I haven't thought about that. I mean, it's all these things, in other words, the whole scenario of normal life changes when a war happens. Everything changes. And so at another level, people will flee a war zone. So like if Venezuela is a war zone, you're going to get huge outward migration. And Venezuelans will come to Trinidad as one location that they would want to come
influx of refugees here and an influx in the United States.
Well, certainly into Colombia and Brazil.
True Colombia
and Guyana.
Okay.
It may be difficult for them to get into the U.S. given Trump's policies, but certainly, and both President Lula of Brazil, he spoke recently at the opening of a Mercosur, which is a Southern Cone trading agreement, and President Petro of Colombia have said quite clearly that if there's any war, a military aggression against Venezuela, Latin America will be completely destabilized.
Good. That's where we want to move to now. We want to look now at the implications for regional politics, for Latin American politics, for the United Nations, and for international politics. What would be the implications of a military attack on Venezuela, trans-military attack on Venezuela in this part of the world? How would the countries of South America and Central America respond?
Colombia has quite openly said that they think that they will also be under attack.
Colombia, yes.
Because Trump has said that Petro is a narco trafficker,
Yeah.
right? When in fact Colombia has been working very hard to try and stop the cocaine trade. But
Yeah.
it's difficult, right? And they have instructed their military to beef up their defenses. And so the attack on Venezuela, quite apart from leading to migration out of Venezuela into Colombia, you might very well see, because the United States has bases in Colombia. They have several bases in Colombia. So how Colombia reacts will be interesting. And what the United States does to Colombia will be very interesting. But that generally there'll be instability. Petro has a very strong position and says, you know, and there's been talk now about Gran Colombia, which was the idea of Simon Bolivar. Because Bolivar didn't only liberate Venezuela, he liberated Colombia and Panama, because Panama was part of Colombia at one time. The Americans intervened to try to change that. And also Ecuador and Bolivia, those were all part of Bolivar's liberation efforts. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Brazil will feel pressured to support, because if the government does not, in Venezuela does not fall, but there's a war, and President Maduro or whoever is in charge of the government continues to fight the Americans, then Colombia and Brazil maybe feel obligated to support them in their battle against the United States. Not that they would send troops, but they may provide economic and other kinds of support. All of these things are possible.
Brazilian political support for Venezuela and condemnation of a United States attack on Venezuela would have repercussions on the rest of South America and Central. What about Mexico?
Yes, Mexico has taken a very strong position in support of Venezuela.
Good.
The president there, President Sheinbaum, has taken very strong positions. She's rebuffed Trump, who wanted to go into Mexico to deal with fentanyl and drug trafficking in Mexico, and she's rebuffed that. So, but on the other hand, there have been some setbacks for the left progressive forces in Latin America. Bolivia, unfortunately, there was a very bad division between President Arce, who just lost, the party lost elections recently. He didn't contest. And the founder of the movement towards socialism, Evo Morales. There was a very bad split. And that split enabled the right wing to win the elections in Bolivia some months ago. And that was very, very bad. And I'm aware that, you know, efforts were made by leaders of major countries in Latin America and so on to get those two, Arce and Evo Morales, to patch themselves up because they knew that a division would simply allow the right wing to come in, which is exactly what has happened. In Honduras, there's been an election which has not yet been declared because there's quite clearly a lot of electoral fraud. And that is where Trump said 2 days before the elections that if you don't vote for this candidate, the right-wing candidate, then I'm going to sanction you. And of course, that scared a lot of Hondurans to vote for this guy. So that election is up in the air, but there was a progressive government in Honduras for a few years, but they now seem to be out. So there's a lot of efforts by the U.S. to have in Latin America and the Caribbean governments that are with them in accordance with their national security strategy, which says, you know, that we want to have, let me just find that particular quote. This is a national security strategy. We will reward and encourage the region's governments, political parties, and movements broadly aligned with our principles and strategy. So they are clearly intervening directly in accordance with the Monroe Doctrine, now the Trump corollary, to make sure that right throughout the Western Hemisphere, there are governments that are supportive of Washington's position.
This is the response of governments. What about people? Are we likely to see individuals traveling to Venezuela from Latin America and the Caribbean to join in support of Venezuela's armed response to an American military intervention?
There may be a few coming out of the Caribbean, but not many. But certainly out of Latin America.
Out of Latin America.
I could see them going to Venezuela, yeah.
Number one, the implications for Trinidad and for Tobago. Number two, implications for Latin America. Now, what would be the response at the United Nations of an American attack on Venezuela and Venezuela taking the matter to the Security Council? Number two, how would Russia, China, and Iran respond?
So Venezuela has already gone to the United Nations with respect to the general aggression by the U.S., asking for a debate. I do not think that debate has happened yet, but they also are now reporting to the UN Security Council the seizure of the tankers.
Of the tankers.
Clearly, Russia and China will support, you know, the Venezuelan position. The United States will simply veto it, and therefore the Security Council will make no decision, because it has to be, any decision on the Security Council has to be with the support of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. The U.S. will simply use its veto power to stymie that. But the matter will get aired. At the level of the General Assembly, they may very well have, you know, more leeway, but the General Assembly has no power. They may have moral suasion, but no power to enforce. China has warned the United States not to do anything against Venezuela. They publicly said so. It seems as if, excuse me, one of the tankers that was seized may have actually been going to China.
Okay.
Which raises major implications for China. But I don't see China or Russia or Iran trying to engage the United States in a firefight. The Venezuelans have said they're going to ask their Navy to escort the tankers out of the Caribbean. I haven't seen that happen yet, we're not sure. But if that happens, and if, for example, oil is going to China, the Chinese decide they want to escort their tanker out, that could have an implication. Will the Americans try to stop that? So the UN, I think, Secretary General did make a statement recently about the need to have diplomacy and not to have any military intervention. Interestingly, the Pope Leo, made a statement some time ago, a couple of weeks ago, saying that there should be no military intervention to bring about change in Venezuela. That was an interesting point, given the fact that, of course, Venezuela is very significantly Catholic in population. So we have to see what the international community will do. The Europeans, I think, are going to go with Washington already. Of course, Britain has Venezuelan gold sitting in the Bank of England for years, illegally, although the courts in England have said it's not illegal, but in my view it's illegal. And so you know where the Europeans are going to go against Venezuela, because part of the strategy is to try to ensure that you have in government right throughout the hemisphere and elsewhere in the world parties that align with what they call Western values. And Western values translates into the values of capital, unbridled capitalism, where a few people can become multi-billionaires at the expense of billions of the world's population.
When we turn to values, we turn to moral and religious implications of what's now taking place. And clearly, Venezuela has the right to choose its own government without countries outside attempting to intervene. The United States raised a hullabaloo about Russia intervening in American elections in 2020, I think it was.
Yes.
A hullabaloo which eventually fizzled out. But that's the same thing that's happening now, regime change. And therefore, I am of the view, now let me express my own views for the first time, that what we're seeing now is an oppressor imposing his will on the oppressed. And in Venezuela, not only is the government supported by the military, but is supported by the oppressed masses, the poor masses of Venezuela. And people who have a moral conscience, people who live the religious way of life, should support the oppressed and stand up against the oppressor. And this brings us now to an interesting part of our discussion, that we have a multi-tribal society in Trinidad and Tobago. The PNM, unfortunately, led by a graduate of Oxford University, the PNM never truly understood the implications of our tribal diversity and the political implications of our tribal diversity for political philosophy, of a coming together of tribes to forge an agreement that will allow us to live together in political equality and in fraternity. And part of the implications of being a multi-tribal society here in Trinidad, more than in Tobago, is that we have Islam, we have Christianity, we have Hinduism as powerful forces. Well, Hinduism and Christianity more than Islam. We have a small community. But you can see what we're doing here at IBN as a Muslim community. It is IBN which is showing the way for the rest of the country to bring together people to discuss the subject in a very polite and a very educated way, without slinging any mud against anybody. That's not our way. That we should be able to come together now at this critical moment for consultations at the tribal level. And I'm hoping, David, that this process of education that we've benefited from all your insights and all the knowledge and all the facts that you presented today, would help to educate our people. And I'm hoping that this session would impact upon the Muslim community, because this is the Islamic, IBN, Islamic Broadcasting Network, that we can have a consultation amongst the Muslim community on what's not happening. You may call it a referendum, that Trinidad and Tobago need a referendum on this issue of relations with Venezuela and relations with the United States of America. But we in Islam, we prefer consultation to referendum. Consultation. I was speaking with Nizam, Brother Nizam Mohammed, the former Speaker of the House of the House of Representatives, and he was constantly focusing on this part of Islam, the process of consultation. How can we promote consultation from our session today? First of all, within the Muslim community, and then with other tribes. Perhaps our listening audience, our viewing audience, can now think about the subject of how we can have a national Muslim consultation on this subject, because we are now faced with a danger greater than this country has ever experienced in its history. I've asked Albion whether they could rebroadcast this session at least 3 times, and the third time that it is broadcast, maybe in January, we will then have a call-in session for viewers to call in on the phone and ask questions or express your views on the subject, of course, without slinging any mud against anybody, and being polite and respecting people when you ask for your views. That's our style. And we'll also open the lines for people calling from abroad. We'll give you a telephone number, a WhatsApp number, and you can call from abroad as well, free of charge. And locally you can also call. And in the event that you agree with our views that yes, we are in need of consultation at this time. It's not just a PNM matter, it's not just a UNC matter, it is a matter which concerns the whole country. And there is significant danger lying ahead, as the discussion with David has clearly represented to us, significant danger lying ahead. And we need to consult with each other. Perhaps if you get on the phone, if you are of the opinion within the Muslim community that there is someone you know who is a senior member of our community who has the attachment to the religious way of life that commands respect, and who has the capacity and the experience to call for such a consultation, because our community is divided. So if one individual calls for that consultation, and he succeeds in getting the people to realize the danger of the moment and to put aside differences, put aside your rivalries, and come together with wisdom, peacefully, and let us have a consultation on the subject. Then if you can think of such, not me, because I live most of my life abroad now. I just came back to Trinidad after more than a year and a few months of travel. And I'm here just one week ago, so I can't do it. If you can think of someone, such a person, then call him on the phone and urge him. Call him on the phone and urge him, why don't you make a call for such a consultation? And if you can impress upon him, and he feels he can do it, let him then make the call for a consultation. Of course, he can speak with us before doing so. And if he can bring together all the different factions of our community, and we have a consultation on the subject, we set the tone for other tribes in the country to consult with each other. It's not a time for political rivalry and mudslinging. Not at all. You can see how David and I have conducted the discussion without any biting comments against anybody. Not at all. That's not our style. David, I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us the very important views you've expressed today. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm sure you agree with me that we are at a moment of very great danger, and there's very great likelihood of an American armed attack on Venezuela, whether it be pinpoint strikes or it's a landing with troops landing on boots on the ground, we don't know. And once that takes place, then there's a likelihood of a Venezuelan attack on Tobago and Trinidad, and that is the danger. We hope and we pray that this initial discussion with David will set the foundation, set the grounds for us to come again to discuss the subject in the near future as events unfold. And in the meantime, we thank David for having spent the time with us today. We are grateful for his scholarship, and we're thankful for all that he's been doing so far in the moral field of promoting that which is righteous and that which has integrity in it, in political affairs, in economic affairs, in social affairs. Thank you, David, and we look forward to our next session.
Thank you very much, Maulana, for having me, and I endorse 100% the need for consultation and discussion. Unfortunately, that's not what happens in our parliament, which is where one of the locations at a national level where it should be happening, that isn't happening. And we hope that perhaps the American public opinion, 70% of the Americans don't want a war between the US and Venezuela. That's your opinion polls. So maybe that might eventually persuade Mr. Trump to find some other way of dealing with the thing. Because as singing Sandra the Calypsonian wisely sang, because nobody wins a war.
Nobody wins a war, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, David, thank you so much, and we look forward to the next session.
Thank you very much.